Wait a second. This is definitely not a Lego Modular building. This time, let's crack the box open straight away and start building. Human helpers, time to do your job. And here they go. But why are we building this set? This is definitely something different than what my collection usually is. Because my space is quite limited when it comes to displaying or storing Lego sets, that definitely puts a limit on what kind of sets I can acquire. Of course, my main focus has always been the modular buildings. But without space limitations, I would even have more of those, because I think that I would have bought more duplicate sets and built some awesome alt builds. And of course, there are tons of very good looking Star Wars sets that I would like to add to my collection. But with Star Wars sets, I have decided to limit myself to minifigure scale dioramas. I already have 2 of those, and I am planning to build a custom third one to sort of complete a set. And of course, because Mr. Human Helper is a Transformers fan on top of being a Star Wars fan, I am not surprised that the Lego Transformers sets ended up in our collection. Luckily, there are only 2 sets in that range currently, so those do not take that much space. Then there are of course other interesting Lego themes. I wouldn't mind adding a minifigure scaled Lego castle in the collection. But once again, that would just take too much space. Of course, Lego Harry Potter theme is also full of very good looking big sets. And at some point I started to wonder if buying some sort of a Hogwarts set would in a way fulfill my desires to get both Harry Potter sets and a Lego castle. But even if it combined 2 themes, I still wouldn't have enough space for that. The end result would just be some smaller section of the entire Hogwarts castle. But then I saw this microscale set, and I got really excited. This would allow me to have the entire Hogwarts castle, but in a very limited space. And building in a smaller scale has been an idea that I have been toying with for quite some while. Way back, there was a Lego set that contained some of the original modular buildings in a microscale versions. And even today, there are Lego fans that create microscale versions of the current Lego modular buildings and sell those instructions on rebrickable.com. That way, I could add some of those out-of-production buildings that are too expensive for me to my collection, even if they would be microscale versions. Or I could try to build a microscale version of my current Lego town. That could be a fun project, and it wouldn't take that much space. All those ideas swirling around my head were just an additional reason for me to buy this set. This allowed the human helpers to test if they would enjoy building in microscale and if I would enjoy the end result. And I have to say that we were all quite happy. But perhaps I should also do some commenting on the actual build here. There is no base plate in this set. You build the base out of black plate. The depth of this build is 32 studs, so it matches exactly a base plate. But this build is 44 studs wide, so it is 12 studs wider than a base plate. But I actually instructed the human helpers to build a slightly smaller version of the base. This change doesn't affect the actual castle part of the build. But that meant that there was a need to build the base of this model slightly differently. That also affected where the joints of the black plates were, and how the mountain build on top of them would have to bridge them together. That is why you can see Mr. Human Helper struggling to build a solid connection at this point. But other than that one corner, there were no real struggles with this modification. Now I got to admit that watching human helpers build all that rock work seemed a bit repetitious. But they assured me that that was not the case. That was because the rock work was built in smaller sections, and most of the sections actually contains some details inside the rock face, as you can see in the side facing to you. The backside of the model also contains similar details. And I think that is great use of the available space. The added height was needed for some of the architectural features, like the causeway between the castle sections, to work, but adding those rooms in meant that the space below the castle was not wasted. It is funny to think that at this point we have spent half of the backs already, and we have actually reached the half point of the build time also. But we haven't built any of the buildings yet. That just proves how much time and parts it takes to build that mountain base. But before we can start building the castle, it is time to add a small boathouse in the upper left corner, and after that, add all the water tiles in. In the end, there were some leftover water tiles as we had modified the base size. That same back also contained some plates and tiles to complete the ground on the far side of the build. And after that, we could finally start building the first castle building. That was the Great Hall and the courtyard in front of it. It was really interesting to see the amount of detail that you can get into such build when you have suitable parts. The finished building was very recognizable, even though it was built in such a small scale. Once the Great Hall and the courtyard in front of it were completed, they were added on top of the build in an angle with the help of a turntable. The rest of the build is built along the studs, so that added a nice bit of variety. The next detail added in was the viaduct bridge. That was also put in an odd angle, but because it was attached only with a single stud, that made it very easy to do so. The next section added in was the quad courtyard. That has 3 smaller towers in each of its corners, and the main tower in one of its corners. And that was quite a large section of the castle, so it took some time to build it. But quite soon, the 3 towers and the wall sections between them were ready. And next it was time to build the main tower. When that is put in and placed next to the viaduct bridge and the Great Hall, the most recognizable section of the Hogwarts Castle is completed there. Next, it was time to move on the other side of the castle in the middle of the build and start building another big section of the castle, the East Wing. One thing that surprised me was the fact that building this took some time, even though the model isn't that big. And that is due to the fact that in order to get the details in a such small scale, meant the parts used were often quite small. But then again, I think that that is one of the main appeals of this set. Finally, the last parts are added to the East Wing section. That section was a nice combination between something that you had already built before, but on the other hand, something new also. That meant that the build never felt too repetitious. The next part that was built was the astronomy tower, and that was quite a bit different compared to the rest of the set, as it was built mainly using studs on side technique. And once the tower was put in, there was only one final part of the castle that needed to be built. And that was yet another courtyard that went around that astronomy tower. So once again, that meant some wall sections and towers. One interesting detail in the Harry Potter movies is that the Hogwarts Castle design varies between the movies, sometimes a little, sometimes quite a lot. I think that this set represents the version that we can see in the Half-Blood Prince movie. That is because the astronomy tower wasn't there in the previous movies, and then again the Deathly Hallows movies make some drastic changes to the viaduct bridge, and this set definitely does not have that version in it. If you want to learn more how the Hogwarts Castle changed from movie to movie, I'll link a video in the description. That video comes from the channel called Hogwarts Expert, and it contains quite a detailed analysis how the Hogwarts Castle changes from movie to movie. If you find such things interesting, you should check that video out. And it seems that the human helpers have finally completed building this set. And it really seemed that the human helpers enjoyed building this castle. And that might mean that we are going to see some microscale modular buildings in the future too, but not in the next video. In that, we are going to take a closer look of this Hogwarts Castle and Grounds set. You're going to get some close-ups of the fantastic architectural features of this set, and also of those rooms that were built inside the base. If you want to get the notification as soon as that video is up, you should consider hitting that subscribe button down there. You can expect the next video ASAP, but remember, when a Sloth says that, it means as slowly as possible. Bye bye.